Hello everyone, we will start this session in a minute. Please take the time to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. We'll give a few more minutes to let other people join us, and then we will kick it off. Please let me know also in the chat if you can hear me well and if you can see the slides saying welcome starting now, starting soon. So let me know if you can hear me well, otherwise I will use a different mic. Hopefully it's fine. Perfect. Thank you for the confirmation. Good to see you, Eva. Good. So let us start the session while more people are joining us, but we will already start. So I want to welcome you to today's webinar by Qualistory. My name is Jan. I'm the director at Qualistory, and I will be your moderator for this session. Today's talk is titled Things that can go wrong during thermal validation and how to avoid. So this webinar will help you to understand what can and will go wrong, even for a trained validation engineer when performing a validation test. And additionally, you will learn all the necessary tips and tricks to help you minimize the risks involved in performing thermal validation. So also please aware that the event is recorded and the link to the recording will be sent to you within several days by our event partner, UPRI. Please use the chat box to your right freely to discuss the topic with your peers as the webinar progresses. And if you have a question for our speakers, please type it in the chat box. And before sending, please click the question mark button. And if possible, mention the corresponding slide number when doing so if it is connected to your question. And we'll address it either directly or at the Q&A session at the end. And if you have any issue with the sound or video, please send us a message. But first of all, try refreshing your Windows or using another browser. It usually fixes all problems. So the webinar will be around 90 minutes and we'll have a Q&A session at the end. If you stay until the end of this lecture, you will receive a free certificate of attendance courtesy of our event partner, UPRI. And you will get the certificate within several days, up to 7 days. Please let us know afterwards if you haven't received it, but first, please check your spam folder. At Qualistory, we aim to provide pharma professionals worldwide freely accessible education and industry insights. And we managed to do it with the help of our incredible partners. And for this webinar, our partner is UPRI, and I want to thank them for doing this event with us. If you have never heard of UPRI before, here's a brief overview of what they do. UPRI provides efficient solutions to monitor temperature-sensitive assets, supporting the development of companies within regulated industries such as pharma and food manufacturers, laboratories, pharmacies, and healthcare. UPRI takes responsibility for delivering an innovative temperature monitoring service that significantly reduces the time organizations spent on temperature monitoring. Their services guarantee compliance with the quality standards, which includes annual 3 points traceable calibration or ISO 17025 accredited calibration, FDA Part 11 compliance, GXP compliance, and more. And according to their case studies, UPRI can help organizations save up to 30 hours per monitoring point annually, freeing up valuable time that can be better utilized somewhere else. And now I want to introduce to you Adam, the co-founder of UPRI, who will introduce our speakers, Jakob and Arsalan. Adam.
Hello. Hi, everybody, and thank you very much, Jan. I'm sitting here with Jakob and Arslan in the room, so therefore the sound comes right now from Jakob and Arslan, but don't be afraid, it's actually me speaking. First of all, thank you very much, Jan, for the presentation about UPRI, and thanks for having us today. We are always super excited about the occasion to talk and give a bit of the insights that we have from UPRI. And this kind of like series of webinars that we have been creating over the last 2 webinars that we have held and the next coming ones that we are holding, then the topics that we have made to kind of be the topics of this webinar is basically based on the questions that we get from customers. And one thing that kept coming up for us was, all these uncertainties and practicalities that arise during a temperature thermal validation or temperature mapping that we obviously perform a lot of. So we thought, well, why not try to wrap it into a nice, neat little box of interesting insights from the 2 specialists that I know is traveling abroad from country to country, from company to company within several different industries, and picking all these cases up where we can see, okay, this was an example of something that went wrong, that we fixed this way, or these things that just occur because a temperature mapping is really something that is highly practical. It's something that just there's so many complexities and things that can happen during a temperature mapping. And that's basically what we are going to talk about today. And I'm so happy to have Arslan and Jakob here, who is specialist in this. Jakob is one of the co-founders of UPRI together with me. And I got to know Jakob back in the days because he was studying space engineering and electronic engineering. So I was like, okay, this guy can really make some electronic devices that we can use in UPRI, huh? So Jakob and I, we have been, really working into this area and figuring out how to do this smart. Arslan is our qualification and validation engineer here in UPRI, and he really has his hands muddy with experience out there performing temperature mapping. So I'm quite excited about this webinar, and I'm now ready to give the words to Jakob and Arslan. But before, I need to remember to say a thing, and that is behind the scenes here, we have 3 very qualified persons from quality, validation, and product that is basically assisting us tonight with the chat going on. So please, we really want to engage with you guys out there. It's so nice to see so many people actually interested in this topic. So put your questions in the chat, and I'm sure they will do whatever they can to try to answer these questions. And also, I will try to grab here and there and take it into a Q&A session what you answer. If I find something that's super interesting and I know we can have a very good conversation about afterwards during the quality and answer session. So looking forward to all your questions and to the Q&A session afterwards. And now the relay for you guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Adam. Well, thank you very much. As Adam mentioned, I think we've had our share of experiences working with different companies in all different kinds of sections within the GXP industries and trying to figure out what can go wrong and what are some of the practicalities. But let me just give you a brief agenda for today. So basically, we've titled this webinar, "What can go wrong? Things that can go wrong during a mapping," and we're going to touch very slightly based on what is a temperature mapping and sort of the structure of a temperature mapping as our red line through this webinar. But we're going to primarily focus today on things that could go wrong. Again, as Adam said, we're going to build upon some of the other webinars that we've had and try to focus on both the protocol process, the execution, and the reporting. And then there'll be a lot of time for questions afterwards. There's usually a lot of questions, and we're very happy for those. But first of all, I think it's really important to understand where mapping fits into the validation process. This is a standard V model, and just to get everyone on the same page, we're basically working with the two last sections of a full validation of a process. So we mainly talk about having these two major sections, the operational qualification and the performance qualification, as part of our mapping exercise. Mainly, those are related to mapping the empty study and or the empty warehouse, for example, and mapping the full, or let's say 50%, trying to augment what happens during normal operation of a warehouse or a fridge or freezer or any other temperature controlled unit. Again, the four different steps during a normal mapping process is, of course, the protocol. The protocol is where we describe what is going to happen. It's sort of a contract between the different interested parties. It's a contract in order and a document to be able to document what are the risks that we've identified, what are the different, what's the scope of the mapping, and also what is the purpose, why are we doing this, and it also outlines the expectations for the reporting afterwards. So this is a very nice document that you can use in order to communicate what are the expectations of the different interested parties, what are their requirements, and how do we plan to test out that we can meet those requirements. The second part here is the execution. That's where we actually go out and do our measurements. We measure at different locations within the usable volume. We can set up our measurement equipment. We take out data. We document how we set up the measurement equipment, and we document if there's any difference between what we thought we were going to do and what was actually on site when we came on site. And thirdly, there's the reporting. The reporting is our key document to be able to prove that the system works as intended, that what we measured is actually within the acceptable limits of what we set out as requirements. It's where we come to our conclusions. Is this a warehouse that can be used for storage of sensitive assets, or is it not? And basically try to ask the very top-down question: do we comply with the requirements? Have we what we set out for in terms of our measurement method, our testing method, and as well the requirements? Do they come within the acceptable limits? And then lastly, we always like to talk about this here at UPRI. We tend to forget in many mapping processes that we're actually working with a qualified system afterwards. And how do we maintain that validated state of the systems? How do we use our learnings from the mapping in order to improve our daily processes? So hopefully, if you watch some of the other webinars, you should be aware of the sort of general process. But now I'll kick it over to you, Aslan. You have a lot of experience working with different.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Jacob, and thank you for explaining the different processes that a mapping, an overall mapping process consists of. That sounds interesting. But now let's go to the non-fun part of it. That's basically what the whole thing is about. Things that can go wrong and that unfortunately will go wrong. Let's take a deep dive into the protocol process, the first stepping stone that you showed us previously. So we are taking some of the most important parts that we have experienced out there, that we see a lot of pharmaceutical companies that you should believe have a lot of knowledge in, and they indeed do. But no matter how much experience you have, a theoretical experience you have, you will find issues out there. And one of the points that we are going to start off with during in the beginning of the whole process, even before start writing on your protocol, is forgetting or not involving all the stakeholders within this validation project, whether it being small bridges or huge facilities. And so let's look at one stakeholder is, as always, this quality unit. So they are the ones with experience from previous mappings. They know a lot of they have a lot of knowledge on the regulatory aspects, and they know the requirements. They know a lot of standards. There are a lot of knowledge that are gathered within the quality unit, and they have internal qualification processes that they want to they are interested in following, and then the next stakeholder in this is the operations. So that will be the people who's actually not sitting in the office like the quality people, but actually is out there in the facilities and doing the everyday operation. Everything is what's going on in the facilities. Well, based on what on the knowledge of the operation people. And they know how to do plans to use the facility and what the equipment is in there, how much are planned to be stored, and if you're storing goods, how much goods are actually stored and how much is removed on a daily basis, and so forth. And then you have the customers. Those are actually also very important stakeholder here. Those are the one who's actually paying for storing their goods inside the facility, and they have their own requirements. They might have some governmental requirements that they need to follow on. So they require you to have and to have taken care of those requirements, that you comply with those. And then you have the next and last part of stakeholders that we find relevant in this matter. That will be the management. So the management know about the future. That could be that this customer coming in here has some requirements, but they know that at some point there will be other customers in there. So they are interested. They have a lot of interest. They might push the quality to make good processes and make the qualification of the facility to extend beyond what this exact customer wants. So all this, these 4 units needs to be interconnected and somehow aligned with each other. So you don't have a situation where you do a fantastic protocol that is outlined exactly what you do, but then the operational people they laugh and say we cannot do it because the facility is not working as it's said in the protocol. So that's a thing we experience a lot out there. Jakob, we talked about it earlier today about all the examples about the somehow like misunderstanding between the different parts when we do as consultants go there and try to do validation. Even for larger companies, even for companies that actually has everything in place and there's much processes and knowledge and everything, it's just important to boil it together in one pot and then start beginning working on your protocol. Absolutely, taking those things in mind.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you very much, Aslan. So the next one, I think this is also one of the things we're often experience in working as sort of outside consultants to companies is really not planning ahead. So trying to identify which bottlenecks are there, and basically if you're missing out on the opportunity to plan ahead, it will often lead to time delays, which are frustrating, which are time consuming, and which are costly also. I think we've experienced that plenty of times. And we have a really good, I think, case story in that regard, which is we worked with a large distribution company which was supposed to handle vaccines, and even though it was a very, very well structured protocol and all the quality of it was really, really high, there was really a lack of sort of understanding the different bottlenecks along the way. I think having a realistic execution plan is really, really important. I think as we've included here, there's a typical execution plan for an empty study, for example. Things like remembering that units need to stabilize after turning them on is a very common mistake. It can often take up to 24 hours for a freezer to stabilize in temperature before you can actually start doing your studies. Stabilization after door openings is a very common pitfall as well. When you're stressing a piece of equipment by opening and closing the doors in order to test the maximum operating range, I think we often see that it takes at least 6 hours before it stabilizes again. And if these things are not planned in during the plan, then it will cause time delays. I think another really common thing we see out there, and we face this a lot being external consultants, is basically finding out whether you need approval in between the installation qualification, operational qualification, and performance qualification. Do you need signatures and that unit, typically quality assurance, do they need to sign in between each step? And I think this is one of the more common things we see out there, at least. I think you would agree with me on that.
I sure do. There is this. It reminds me of a story actually out there for this large pharmaceutical company also handling vaccines. So the plan was laid and everything was working as planned until we got to the point that we needed to get approval for the operational qualification documentation. And then at that point figured out that they had 7 days of processing for approval. That directly means that your project is delayed by 7 days, even though you had a protocol that says exactly what to do. It didn't take account of the time planning. So yeah, that's interesting.
Absolutely. And but I'll kick it over to you for the next thing.
Sure. Let's see what's up next. So what else we have chosen to among by the way, a long list. We have included this not accounting for risk categories, and by risk categories I mean different types of risk that are present in a facility. Now on the picture you see a facility that accounts for anything else. It could be a van or a TCD, a wagon, or a freezer or a fridge. But let's take a look at the categories. And let me click one more time. So the risk not covered. We in EUPRI we have developed these 3 categories of risks that we find and we believe and that our experience show that actually covers all the risks within a facility. And let's start off with compliance risks. And that can be divided into 2 subcategories. Like one is the regulatory requirements. That would be the governmental requirements. That could be FDA or the EMA or whatever governmental institution that have some strict requirements. And then to have the standards to follow. Those are also very good. We mostly base our risk assessment upon the WHO, the World Health Organization standards, and the ISPE, the International Society for Pharmaceutical Engineering. So those are the kind of compliance risks that you need to take care of and follow some guidance. That might seem easy, but then
maybe so we can compliment you on that. I think also you and I discussed that often we see customers who wish to deviate from the compliance requirements, but that can be okay. But having sort of a structured approach in how to document your reasoning behind deviating from the standards is something that can lead to non-conformities from auditors or governmental institutions. We often see that, at least, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So there is this thing that you have some standards and then just follow at a minimum, and then you actually forget what we're going to talk about next. So there's like beyond all those standard risks that you need to take care of, there might be from place to place, from unit to unit, be some technical risks that take care of. That could be machinery. If you look at the image we have in the slide, there is some truck lifts on one side of the bottom side of the picture that they might be charged in there. Those are like electrical lifts. So there is some machinery there that can generate heat, and there are the vac systems, the ventilation heating systems that are outlined there as well. Those are also some risks that you need to take care of. It's not standardized. It could be placed anywhere. It could be any shape. It could be direct heating, radiant heating, or it could be some air cushioning throughout the whole facility. So there's much difference out there, and you need to take those risks into account as well.
Yeah.
And then lastly, but also not at least, is the operational risks. That actually means the people during operation, walking in and out of a facility or a unit, or so you have any doors that are used, any gates that are used for inbound and outbound activities. You need to take those risks as well. There could be some office facilities next to the building that is actually regulated. Then you have non-regulated areas where you have maybe ambient temperature, but it's not regulated and it's not controlled. So those risks you need to take into account as well when doing your risk assessment in the protocol, in the overall risk assessment. So those are again stuff like Jakob mentioned, that we see that out there they just want to do something that is at least energy spent, but then they figure out afterwards by audits, customer audits, or governmental audits, that it's actually an issue out there, and we meet it time after time out there.
Absolutely. I think also in to follow up on that, what we often see also is that the operational risks are very hard to comprehend for new facilities, because there's no sort of defined written procedure for how the facility is going to be used. If we take freezers, as we had the not so far ago, how long time do you open the doors? If you have not sort of have a common agreement on that, it will be very hard to identify the risk.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah. But I'll move on then to sort of move into the next phase of the mapping process. What is it that can go wrong during the execution? So we're actually out there measuring. And one thing we see, which is very, very common, I believe comes from the basic assumption that often companies will use on-site personnel, which might not be trained to good documentation practice and to the general mapping process. And those people will pose a risk, or those people can sometimes make mistakes. And what we gain from that is often that we get incorrect documentation in test plans, for example. Or it could be not following test plans and test protocols exactly as they should. And now we've included the Alcoa principles here. Those are very basic to good documentation practice, but we often see over and over again that those are not being followed for mapping documentation. And as we'll see in one of the later things that could go wrong, this often leads to quite serious issues, because you're not able to document what happened that caused an excursion in temperature, for example. Some of the things that also happens a lot is misplacement of loggers, and we see this a lot of times, because you have this interface between sitting in your office and making a protocol that's very nice and neat and planned out the perfect world, and now it comes into the real world, and those positions. What's the rationale behind placing data loggers at those different positions? And if you do not follow them, then you won't get the expected result, and you won't get the expected data from it. And it also means often that you'll have to redo measurements, which is very costly in terms of time and budget often. But what can you do about it? Well, of course, training of people. It seems very, very simple, but often we see that companies have not taken the time to train everyone who's going to be involved, and that goes for the people setting up data loggers during an execution of a mapping, to the people on site, the facility managers. If everyone is aware of what's going on, the chances of success, they go up drastically. We often see non-conformities related to people mishandling equipment or otherwise not really acting appropriately, both in terms of documentation and operating the facility.
Yeah, and yeah, actually, it's that's what we can boil it down to. What to do to avoid all these issues? It's to get people trained, all people involved trained. But what we see out there sometimes, especially as you mentioned, for new facilities, there are so many different type of people in there. There could be construction workers that are there maybe once a week only, and then there are some of the facility workers who just started off, they're working inside the facility, who doesn't even know the facility well enough. So it is hard. It's hard. It's very easy for us to pinpoint that's a mistake, but it's a very serious mistake, and therefore it's something that needs to be taken care of more in depth that we see out there, because it is hard, and we acknowledge that, and we see that out there. But basically, from timeline that are not followed to misplacement and loggers, that can cause what we spoke about earlier, that the risks are not taken care of anyway. If you have the data logger placements out there, so interesting point as well.
Absolutely.
So let's go next. Yeah. So this one actually, we have a poll on this one. It's about missing ongoing data monitoring. So there will be a poll in the chat and the poll forum. So please, guys, go ahead and see whether you have experienced that the equipment did not pass the requirements, and only found out this afterwards because you didn't have any data monitoring while doing the actual mapping. Let's see. Could you please click on that?
Yes.
Some technical issues here. One moment. Thank you. So yeah. So as the question in the poll as well. So you if you do not have data monitoring while you do the mapping, it can result in testing and non-compliant equipment. So that's waste of money, that's waste of time. And then afterwards you figure out actually that you can do some adjustments to make this unit compliant. But having this, the data monitoring will you will avoid doing that, and therefore you will not have this expansion of a timeline for the whole process.
And I can see, Arslan, I'm just going to interrupt you really quickly. I can see that roughly 60% have experienced this exact thing that we talked about earlier as well. Yeah. Like really doing all your measurements and then basically finding out that the equipment did not pass. It's okay. That's a little more than I expected, at least, but it is something we see from time to time. Absolutely.
Exactly. And so what can you do? Well, the pre-qualification, that's basically much easier when having a monitoring of your data while you start off everything. So what's pre-qualification? That's basically to some data gathering and looking upon data and seeing if everything is all right, actually, that we can go ahead and everything looks good. Because it could be some simple issues as having too low of a set point. The image you see, the graph you see on the screen, it depicts a situation where a freezer is actually a bit too cold. It's like low there beyond the lower limit. And then with a slight change, it looks pretty well afterwards. So that's the pre-qualification. And it's only possible and easy when you have data monitoring. So that's a thing. And then generally you can act upon issues immediately. You can figure out that there's actually a gate that is leaking air or something. So start sealing that off, or finding out that there's some rooftop windows that actually the sun is heating the facility directly. That's stuff that you can act upon easily by just having some UV filters or anything. So having missing data monitoring is a thing that we see out there. And we figure out that is the thing out there, and therefore our monitoring system is letting us do this this part.
Yeah, and I think also as we've progressed through the years, we also see that the time of USB data loggers is over. Hopefully, I think most people today they prefer wireless systems, and I think this is also really a core part in why you can use any wireless system to really and have a sort of a real-time overview of the data, specifically like in the early stages of a project. just to measure whether everything is all right before you start the long thing.
Yeah, exactly. Imagine doing a prolonged PQ study that what usually you do out there. So you have a facility fully functioning, and you want to gather a lot of data for 14 days of data, and then you do a lot of work on the protocol. You do a lot of installation for of the data loggers, and then you run this for 14 days. And then you figure out afterwards that there's something wrong, and then you have to redo everything. So it's time saving, and it's we find it a thing that really deserves to be on this slide. It's we meet it out there, and
I'm gonna go ahead with the next thing, which is basically one of the issues that we talked about earlier today as well, which is missing communication with on-site personnel. And some of the things that kind of leads to is often an abruption of a test. We talked earlier today as well about going from smaller units, fridges, freezers, ULT freezers, but and those are much more critically susceptible to these abruptions of test. If you have a stability study and someone unplanned opens the fridge, it causes a large disruption of the test you're doing. You might not even be able to use it. Another thing is for large warehouses, I think we've seen times and times over now, is basically technicians coming in and keeping the doors open because it's nice and hot and summer, and that kind of ruins most of the data that you've collected, and you need to start over. So I think another big thing we see with on-site or missing communication with on-site people is basically that you can gain non-conformities during the studies. And one of the common things we see is that we suddenly see, if you see a temperature excursion, and there's no documentation of why that the temperature excursion happened, it's really hard to justify that those temperature excursions were out of the ordinary and caused by some external parameter rather than it being because someone opened the door. So again, it's all about communication. I think that's one of the key takeaways today. Really try to involve everyone who's working on the site. I think in my optics at least, there's sometimes there can be a division between the quality unit performing these thermal validations and the on-site people working with the facilities. But we see over and over again that if you have a really close connection with the operational team and the quality unit, that the risks for interruptions of mappings like this, those go way down.
Actually, listening to you talking about all these issues, it reminds me of a small story. Actually, that's just got to me. Once we were doing a mapping for a new facility at this large logistic company, and so since it was a new facility, it was this operational qualification of how everything works on. So the regulation of the temperature was all set. There was the temperature controller all set, so we started running the temperature, and within the first 2 days we realized a dip in temperature was super cold in there. So and because we had this data monitoring, so we started to contact the facility and ask them about what's happening. And it turned out because there was some, and it's absurd but still funny, there was this construction workers working in there. They had boxes of chocolate that were believed that was melting, so they were scared, and they found a regulator and just turned that on, and that resulted in 5,000 square meter of facility being like 14 degrees.
But it happens.
They have never heard about anything about the mapping going on in there, so that's the missing communication that can result in in stories like that. Next, we'll go to the last part of the 3 steps that Jakob started off talking about. So when now we are gone through the execution, we have gathered the data, and then we come to the reporting and data analysis, and here it's very important to actually review the documentation that you have gathered through your process of from the beginning, where you set up the data loggers and you do all the testings, and you have, so all this documentation needs to be reviewed by the unit who's actually doing the data analysis, and not having data analysis. Or not having the review of the documentation can actually result in invalid data. And by invalid data, I mean you can have data that you believe is a stability study for a unit, that you want to figure out if this unit is capable of maintaining temperatures while being shut down and sealed off. And then you see a graph like the one in there. Data clearly shows that there has been some door openings, that the unit didn't have time to stabilize, and you see some time spots of stabilization with some cooling cycles, but you also see that there's something going on there, and the documentation for this specific data set did not have any what do you call it, the non-conformity noted in there. So it's super important to review everything, and basically this is we actually let's have a poll.
Yeah.
Let's have a poll. In your experience, like is missing or incorrect data an issue? Have you experienced it out there, and to what extent do you find lacking data or the lacking notational in the test plans and such? So please go in there and give your own experience, so we can see what's out there. And meanwhile, talking about this data review of documentation, it can at some point at the end lead to misleading conclusions. For example, to have a concrete example, this figure we are looking at, this graph, you will not be able to stamp this unit for being compliant, because it's not. But that could be part of some misunderstanding to the process that you are not no documentation for if you don't review everything and actually pinpoint or redo the mapping or whatever. So reviewing documentation is essential to have conclusions that are actually accountable. You can be accountable for, and in general, like not spotting errors and non-conformances in time. That means that you have a lot of set of data. You start analyzing the data, and you spend a week on the analysis, and then you figure out that actually those data loggers were not set up here and there. So you cannot actually, your purpose is to map this area, and you don't know the placements of the data loggers and such. So it's so review of documentation from our perspective, our experience is something we will really recommend having an extra eye on it, and actually spending some time on that one, even though it's not as fun as doing the analysis itself, and actually look at some good data.
And I think also to add to one of our previous discussions today, having sort of this structured approach on how to do the review of the data and do it very, very early in the process is also something that we found has gained a lot of benefits. So basically, we see two approaches to the review of documentations. I think in general, the ones who do all the executions of the mappings and then review it just before having to do a report. But we advocate the use of actually reviewing the documentation after each step. So setting up the data loggers and documenting calibration certificates, review of calibration certificates, for example, and then reviewing the documentation. Because back again to having a real-time overview of the data, reviewing in smaller incremental steps along the way results in far less risks in terms of, and I can also see I'm following up here on the poll, and it basically, luckily, it seems like a lot of people don't experience the missing or incorrect as a very large issue, and I think that's also in line with what we experience. It's not often that it happens, but the implications can be really, really high.
So when it happens, then it has a huge impact. Absolutely. So
Yeah. So basically, the next topic that we brought up is something that we see happening sort of at the end of projects, also of course for part of the reporting period, but basically not following up on deviations and changes. And just to elaborate slightly on that, deviations can be stuff that did not happen according to the mapping protocol, and changes we normally categorize as having changes to the facility, for example, that happened through the time when the protocol was approved on until the execution actually happening, and not following up on those on a sufficient level can lead to invalid reporting. We've seen that time and time again that the following up on these changes to the protocols or deviations that occurred during the executions were not really thoroughly analyzed, and the root cause was not found, and the applications were not found, and that basically leads to invalid reporting or non-valid important reporting. So therefore, it's really important to assess non-conformities in a very structured and objective way. Which kind of documentation can you find? Also documentation that's outside the scope of the mapping. We've looked at camera footage from facilities. We've looked at the logbooks to find out where do these deviations come from, and also where do changes come from. How was it decided to move stuff around in a warehouse, for example, or other things like those, like this. They can really lead to a much more believable report, because you're able to document that you are aware of the change or the deviation, and that you've handled it in a responsible manner.
absolutely.
Yeah. And also, I think, this really leads us back to one of the things that I've also already mentioned. But basically, we see a lot of times where the protocols are prepared so much in advance that the changes or the specifications at that time are not valid anymore. And to follow up on those things is extremely important, because it makes the reader or the authority or the organization or the customer, whoever is reviewing the documentation, it makes it so much more believable that you are aware and you are in control of all the changes that are going on. And if you're able to communicate that through the reporting, you're way better off. That's for sure.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
And now we have done the reporting as well, so we should be off and good.
Be off the hook
yeah,
now.
Yeah. So, but there's still things that can go wrong, unfortunately, afterwards as well. So basically, we have experienced that the people do not use the information from the report afterwards, and not updating the processes afterwards. So the whole point of the mapping, the validation, the thermal validation is to pinpoint how good the facility is for once, but also to pinpoint some hot spots, some cold spots, some places in the large facility that you have to be more aware of. So these conclusions and information is needed to be acted upon. And that could be like fixed monitoring system to have fixed monitoring post mapping process to constantly monitor your facility and making sure that you use those recommendations from the report to choose the position. Positioning of the monitoring loggers.
And maybe
make a minute.
Yeah, and also to follow up on that, I think as you mentioned, one case that we often see is that companies would like to, and organizations would like to determine the amount of fixed monitoring data loggers before you actually get the reporting from the thermal validation or the mapping. And that's really not, in our optics at least, the right approach to doing it, because you need to identify what kind of risks do a certain piece of equipment or warehouse pose, and then how many data loggers do you need to place after that. I think it's one of the things that often go wrong is that people have sort of misunderstood the guidelines within the field, that you should only place one data logger at the hotspot and one data logger at the cold spot. And that's not really accurate, because you can have several hotspots, you can have several risks near gates or machinery or whatever. So I think that's one of the things we at least encounter often, right?
Exactly. And then the operational changes that might be needed after doing a thermal validation of the system and doing a mapping can show you, actually, if you have had an operational procedure dictating that you can open your fridges for 2 minutes, and that has been the way of work for other units. But if you get results that telling you that 1 minute is more than enough, because the unit cannot comply otherwise with the temperature requirements, then you need to act upon that report and result, and do changes in the SOPs, your procedures, in order to actually doing the right thing, actually following the whole process. So in order to be qualified, it's not only having this protocol execution and reporting, but also acting upon and respecting those results, actually.
Absolutely.
That's the point of it.
And I think also, we sometimes talk about why is it you don't implement these changes afterwards. And I think it all boils down to the human nature of being comfortable in redoing these things. And that's also why we strongly believe that the quality unit should take responsibility in actually implementing the changes after the findings of the report. It is something that the report is often forgotten, sort of, and it's put in a drawer somewhere and not really looked upon. But it should, I think from my perspective, it should really be viewed as a sort of yet another study and yet another baseline for how you should operate your premises, rather than just stating that it was okay or not okay. Exactly. We often talk about this this concept of binary conclusions. I think the misconception is often that a mapping report is a binary conclusion. It's either okay or it's not okay. But it's much more varied than that. It's much more related to certain areas might be used, or you talked about the amount of time you can open a door to a freezer, for example. It's much more varied than that, and it's much more complex. And that's also one of the things I think makes it difficult for companies to incorporate it, because it's not just okay, not okay, like a calibration certificate stating that the equipment was okay or not okay. It's much more varied than that, at least.
Exactly. So and one of the last points for the report that you finally have after a temporary mapping is that we see out there, unfortunately, that some are just seeing this as a burden somehow, that you need to do it. It's some regulatory requirement. Then you have done it. Then you're done. All is good. And the whole perception of it is strikingly odd. When you actually can use this for having better procedures all the time, and you can better your. But as Jakob mentioned, changes are not always welcomed, and it's more to be comfortable and doing as you always do. So I think those were the points that we figured were important to let you guys hear about, and also to finally having also the opportunity for us to share the experiences that we have. It has been a pleasure having the time to pinpoint everything, although it has been hard to pinpoint specific topics because there's so much out there, and we see so much potential and points that you actually can potentially do so much better by being aware of the things that can go wrong.
So I think now we'll switch to a Q&A discussion. So please, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat below, and then we'll have our colleague Adam here going through some of the questions. As Adam mentioned earlier, we have a full team of many of our great colleagues who will do their best to answer, and hopefully have done. We haven't been able to see all the questions just yet to go through all the different questions that you have. But we have Adam with us here, and hopefully you guys have some great questions.
Take it out.
Thank you so much. That was just great. I'm just gonna give you like 2 seconds to take a drink, and then I'll try to fry you with questions from the Q&A session. I know the guys on the other side of the room has been working very hard, Annalena and Tina and Mads, to answer as many questions as you guys had. I hope you enjoyed it. At least I enjoyed your presentation super much. And I really think it gives a quite decent deep dive into, you know, what goes on during a mapping, and strikingly, it's a lot about humans. You know, it's a lot about practicalities. It's something super down to earth, right? It's not, you know, when looking at thermal validations and validations in general. First of all, it seems like a very like academic, scientific thing. But what you have actually presented today is like opening up the box, and it's a lot more like tangible. It's human, it's stakeholders, it's practical stuff that goes wrong, right?
Exactly.
That's super striking, actually.
I think one of the things we discussed as well during our preparation for this webinar is that it's really where the theory meets the real world in terms of a mapping, and planning and education and training is a really large part of having a successful temperature mapping. It's really one of the things where a retraining is a very good mitigator for the risks involved, I think.
Yeah, ongoing training.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And as you mentioned, Adam, it is a world where theory meets like literally like practicality out there. These facilities and people who actually are trained and are working for doing a lot of operations, and that are not aware of any part of these regulations and everything. So it's this good combination of having the knowledge distributed in the right amounts. Of course, you don't need a full like GMP courses and the training for all facility members, but in the right amount. Because we unfortunately see that some places there is close to none training out there. So
that's really also what makes it interesting. Is that
super interesting. Yeah.
So
I think you guys are the most interesting ones to listen to, honestly. So I'll just move the microphone around because it was pointing towards me, and I think I'm just a question guy. So very, very interesting. Something that came up along the lines of the Q&A question answer part of the webinar here was several questions about standard protocols.
yes,
And I know that one of the things that our customers value us for the most is the ability to make super fast tailored protocols. And it's kind of like, so what is really because now you're talking so much about, the fact that, this is all about knowing your own situation, your warehouse, your people, your everything like that. And then, it seems like a mismatch, standard protocols. Doesn't it really need to find a balance there, right?
I think it's a really, really great question. I think something that we've often discussed is how tailored should you make each mapping protocol and each mapping approach. And I think mainly we often come back to the same conclusion, which is if you've considered all the 3 different risk categories, then you're pretty much safe. In my optics, at least, it's so much about communicating what are the requirements, what is the scope, which risks are there, and how do we plan to measure that. So one of the I often refer to the WHO guideline on this because it's a great standard. It's for free. It's only like 20 pages long or so, and it gives a great introduction to 80% of what it is that you need to know. And I think in my mind, a protocol doesn't have to be very elaborate or very long in order to be fulfilling and to be very, very accurate. I think it's most important is, did you consider the risks associated with performing a temperature mapping? And have you clearly defined what requirements are? And have you clearly defined how you plan to test that? I've yet to see a protocol being rejected when it has those three things in order. To me, at least, those are the three most important things.
Yeah, sure.
I don't know what you
Absolutely, I totally agree. One benefit of having a tailored protocol contra having a standardized some template protocol is that you will have so much information regarding the facility in that one that when having the auditors looking at that, they basically go through the whole facility, the description of the facility, that is, and of course you have to the risk assessment that is fully covered. Then it makes easy for you as the one being audited by the audited to actually have few documents. So you have a document that actually have so much information that there could be some other separate facility description documents that can be avoided because you have so much description in there. So that's what I believe in additional to what Jakob is saying, that that's the benefit of spending more time on a protocol that is more in depth.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but taking risks into account, those then it's good to go. So you don't have to have a protocol that is in that deep. We just find it, at least we tailor mostly our protocols here, and we do it because we find it more easy to read. Also, it's also having this end goal of it. It's about someone to read the protocols, and
it's more expensive for the customers. And I know, a standard protocol just, take out of the drawer is obviously the cheapest, but it seems like it's a business case, because everything can go wrong afterwards with a standard protocol, whereas you have a lot more risk covered.
Oh yeah.
With tailored, is that kind of the balance that you want to make with a tailored protocol?
I think often some of the things we see when going out to clients is often that if they had previous mappings that were rejected by regulators, it's often because it was way too standardized, that didn't go into depth understanding each organization's scope. What was the extent of the mapping they were performing? What was the purpose of it? Not describing in great detail what's about, and as Aslan said, really having a good basis for understanding the risk assessment that was made. If you don't describe how the different technical risks and operational risks, where do they come from? Why is it that we believe that doors are a problem, or it could be a problem is because they're facing the outdoors? If you haven't described this, you'll need to find that documentation elsewhere, and that often leads to kind of a mismatch between the people authoring a protocol, what were their basis of understanding for making the risk assessment. I think some of the things that go wrong sometimes is we often see as well that a risk assessment has been performed, but on the wrong basis. It is not justified why the author of the protocol would know what risks to evaluate if it's clear in the protocol that they didn't have a good understanding of the technical layout of the facility, the technical installations, and the use of it. And also as a third party, if an organization doesn't have a clear understanding of how it's going to be used, it's also impossible to do a good risk assessment, because how long are you opening doors? When are people there? Is it a 24/7 operation? Is it only during daytime? There's a lot of things influencing the risk assessment. Absolutely.
Right. Thank you. Another thing we haven't been too much around is, sometimes when I'm lucky to be around a mapping, I realize something, and that is, the amount of paperwork out there. And an example I remember was, at one side of the table we had all the calibration certificates on the data loggers. On the other side we had the report with filling in stuff. And then I was just like, oh my God, man, there's so much opportunity to fail in noting down wrong calibration numbers, IDs, data loggers, etc. All this, obviously that's the reason why we are in the market, but what is really the challenging part with working with manual labor like this? as a position to what you guys do when you're out there with the equipment that we have available?
Yeah, I think one obvious thing is that the more like manual work you have, the more prone you are to make errors. So having documentation that are printed out, and you have lots of paper. One thing is to store it correctly, and if spotting the important stuff in there, and then the way we do it, we have everything in like electronically. So you have the same content just electronically that's easy accessible as well. That could be like accessibility during an audit. You can easily find something electronically that going through lots of the documentation. We had this project going on with this pharmaceutical company who did lots of large freezers, this ULT, ultra low freezers, and what they had in their procedures was to have all raw data, everything in paper. That resulted in I think more than 30,000 pages of printed pages, at least, and that was extreme. And in storing that, and all the extra work on doing actually the manual printing, and finding the right spots, the hot spot and cold spot. It sounds like unbelievable, but you had to go through this 800 pages of raw data to find that exact measurement. So,
and I think also to follow up on that, I think one of the things we see is also that we're seeing sort of a shift in the industry towards the basic understanding that manual processes causes a lot of errors.
Exactly.
And I think we see at least that regulatory authorities kind of start to understand that as well, that the paradigm of having manual or paper-based documentation for integrity reasons is shifting away from sort of seeing the paper as the gold standard to seeing digital as the gold standard. I think in a very, very practical sense, as you said about finding out and sifting through data is much less error prone in a digital system. Basically having access to the digital system where you can search, where you can do automated checks of the validity of the data. Of course, I think it's important to note that all digital systems also do pose a risk in terms of data integrity and in terms of the validity of the data. But there are many great standards and guidelines to sort of rely on that. Again, the most famous is 21 CFR Part 11, which ensures that you have data integrity and validity of data. But in general, I think we're seeing a shift towards industries accepting that digital systems are safer and they are more easily to use, and they're also way less time consuming.
So that's maybe something that, like calibrations, and now you mentioned Part 11 also. What kind of calibrations do you typically, would you typically go for? Do you still see?
Oh, that's a very good question.
Accredited, or is it just NIST-ish?
Oh yeah.
Or where are you actually there?
Oh, that's a really, really good question, because it's often a question that we're being asked: should you go for a traceable calibration? Should you go for an accredited calibration? And which accreditation body do you need to choose, if so, or which accredited laboratory do you need to choose? And I think it all boils down to the simple question of trust. Do you trust the calibration laboratory, or does someone else trust the calibration laboratory? And I think in a lot of cases, specifically within the GDP lower sections, traceable calibrations are sort of accepted, as long as you do your supply evaluation thoroughly. But I think it's important to note that if you don't have a really well-funded supply evaluation program, communicating that you've audited your suppliers and that you can trust them can be very, very difficult. That's where the accreditation, of course, gains all its advantages, that an unwilling third party has already evaluated the calibration laboratory's performance, and that they put their stamp on saying that this calibration laboratory knows what they're doing, they're technically proficient, their quality management system is in order. And I think in more and more cases, we start to see that accredited calibrations are necessary, because auditing you as an organization yourself, a supplier, a calibration laboratory, you need a subject matter expert to be able to understand the different technical aspects of it as well.
Exactly. So that choosing accredited in comparison with traceable actually offloads yourself a lot of work. There's someone who's done the job, as Jakob mentioned. So and we do see that in the logistic in the GDP area as well, and not only in GMP. So that's the thing we see out there, and we also actually understand their point now. The main thing is actually to not having so much work yourself. To if you choose a traceable and doing all the auditing and all the paperwork yourself, then you just choose a accredited laboratory and you're good to go, because there's stamps and everything that people have done their work to make sure that they are.
So it seems like it's a choice between, doing it yourself and doing all the auditing, and also knowing how to do this auditing well, and that costs money. That's what you say, compared to just selecting a ISO 17025 accredited calibration laboratory like UPRI to actually just deliver it all in a standardized package. Where you can trust this ISO 17025 umbrella of laboratories that are available worldwide almost, right?
Absolutely. And I think as a company, you should ask yourself the question, how do I prove that the calibration that has been performed with enough technical, sufficiently technically good and up to standard to an auditor. And if you cannot document and show that you have a great understanding of the calibration process yourself, and therefore being able to audit a supplier, then you should go for an accredited, in my opinion at least.
Simply put. Thank you.
And what about entry exit calibrations?
When
do you test plans and when do you when you start and when you end?
That's again that depends on the requirements for you. So and the requirements they vary a lot from GMP, good manufacturing practice, and if you have some good distribution practice, or whether it's the clinical or laboratory. So sometimes it can be very simple for you. You have some requirements that you need to follow. So you need the entry calibration for units, and you do the testing and you do the mapping or whatever, and then you need to end calibrate in order to trust on the validity of the data that you have gathered. And it's again, it's also depending on what kind of equipment do you use, and what type of. Then you require actually technical knowledge about the supplier that you choose. So if you have some type of sensors that you don't have technical knowledge about, and then you can understand the drifting of that sensor will be very, very low. Then you can have your risk assessment about not doing an end calibration and just having an entry calibration. On the other hand, if you have some old or some units that you do not trust, some thermal sensors that are not that are drifting much, and you do have that knowledge, then you're actually prone to do the end calibration to make sure that the data is valid.
Do you help customers with that? Because I know something we talk a lot about in here is that our data loggers, they drift. The drift is very, very, very limited, almost non-existing for some of our sensors, which is also the ones that are typically used for temperature mappings. How can you assist the customer in this process? Do you have a risk guide, or would a company like UPRI have that?
Yeah, so I think it is actually a quite simple question. So basically, what you're worried about in terms of entry and exit calibration is, did something happen to that equipment while mapping that made it go out of specifications? And looking at today's modern sensors like our own, the drift is infinitely small compared to the very short time span in which the mapping is ongoing. And also, how harsh do you treat your sensors? I think for typically warehouse storage, the typical acceptable range is 15 to 25 degrees. That's kind of the ideal temperature to store to store a sensor in. That is where it will have minimum drift. But then again, you have cases with, as we've seen a lot of lately, ULT freezers where they're stored at -80 degrees. That's kind of more harsh on a sensor, and you will experience more drift of a sensor like that. But again, it all boils down to what is the risks associated with it, because another approach that we've seen a few times is actually to take out a sample, to start calibrate all your sensors and then take out a sample of the data loggers used and end calibrate them. Because if they all experience sort of the same environment, the chances of them all drifting in the sort of same manner is quite reasonable. But then again, you also have other specific scenarios where if you drop a temperature sensor, some types of temperature sensors, if they are dropped, they will shift in temperature. Most of them will. So that's of course another part of where should you choose your strategy from. But it requires some deep technical knowledge to answer that question fully, to be honest. But again, I think as a rule of thumb, if you're working with fridges and ambient storage, you should be fine technically for most cases. But up beyond that, it would be a good idea to have end calibration. Yeah.
And then obviously you can say that because you both have like super deep technical
Yeah.
knowledge, and you know what to look for and how to react if, let's say, a data logger is dropped from, I don't know, 7 meters in the warehouse, right? Then you know, okay, we'll note it down and log, and we'll need to like be cautious about this one.
And I think a good starting point is looking at the data sheet of the sensor and seeing it's often written as an annual drift, maximum drift, and that's normally written as something that's one standard deviation of all the data loggers would drift. So multiply that by 2, then you're on the safe side, you're at 95%, and then you can sort of take that number and compare it to what are my limits for acceptable levels. Yeah.
We got a question from Lucia Smartanova, and she's wondering, the processing data during a temperature. Does the method that you use need to be validated? And I know we've stumbled upon, spreadsheets and Excel and all that. And what is your, how do you work out validating that process and working with that kind of problem?
Yeah. So the simple question is yes. The data, the calculus needs to be true. The system needs to be validated. But then again, the typical calculations and data analysis involved in a mapping can be quite simple. It's often related to averages and peak temperatures, peak high temperatures and peak low temperatures. So the data analysis is quite simple. What is not so simple is making sure, for example, that you have all your data points. If you have some systems that show graphical representations of data, how do you make sure that you have the full set of data? Normally, when you write a protocol, you would have a requirement for how often you need to measure temperature. Let's say every 5 minutes. That's a very typical limit for how often you need to have data samples. How do you make sure that you have every 5 minutes and that you're not missing anything in the middle? Another common approach is also to sort of do calculations for the homogeneity of temperatures. So what's the difference between the highest and the lowest temperatures? But if you can't show that those analysis results are valid, then of course it's a problem, just like good documentation practice and just like all the other requirements. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm always so excited, when we send off Aslan or some of the other guys to whatever destination in the world with a huge trunk of all sort of equipment. So maybe like I'd like to the small tips and tricks that you have out there. I've seen your tripods that you can lift up in 5 meters height, and your laser angular tools, and you have so many smart tools. And I know I'm so so excited when you show me that. Can you just give me a quick insight into what is the quick wins out there? With all the
Yeah, that's a very good question, and yes, we do indeed have a lot. We have through the time we have had to be like more imaginative and to overcome some issues, and that's by doing some practical fixing. And we do the bottom line for us is that when we do a risk assessment and then it's about just like to go there and actually perform the mapping as it's intended. And it has shown actually us that with experience have shown us that it is possible to use your imagination sometimes, and with the right equipment you can go in the heights that you need to go up there. One common mistake when doing temperature mappings that was not on the list, but is that you need to cover the whole volume in your facility. That means also in the height. And mostly, if you imagine you have pallet shelves, then you have the last shelf at, let's say, 10 meters. And upon that one, you store your goods that can be pallets of 2 meters height. So that means that your goods are stored at 12 meters height, but you've nowhere in the air to store to have your data loggers. So that's the issues that because we respect the risk assessment so much and we find it so important. So we do alterations to the facility by like putting some basically some tripods or something to actually reaching the whole volume of the facility. And frankly, that's a very interesting part of what we do. So one thing is being nerdy in the office and do some data analysis, but it's really good and handy to get out there and get some dirty hands and do some work out there as well. So it's interesting.
And I think also to follow up, it's also one of the things that often go wrong during a mapping is that you didn't think about how do you physically plan to get to that spot where you placed it on the floor plan. Like one very common thing we see is with pallet shelves, for example, in the height, you want to place it on sort of the back wall. But if it's not really possible due to safety requirements and so forth to get there, you need to plan that ahead, because no one wants to be dangling off a pallet shelf at 12 meters height. Do you need safety equipment? Is it possible, or can we accept moving the data measurement point just out a few meters? All those things kind of come by nature. But I think also to follow up on nice equipment, I think tripods is a really cool thing. You can place those everywhere. Double-sided tape is also one thing that we use a lot of, because you can really stick it to any surfaces. And a laser distance measurement unit is really great as well, because it gives you great opportunity and flexibility to measure sort of from every sort of angle and height.
Exactly. And essentially some broomsticks or just some plastic sticks that you can put on some pallet posts to prolong that height for a meter, a half a meter. It's just enough to actually do the installation in accordance to the protocol, in accordance with your risk assessment. So there are some small tips and tricks that we use and we develop on ongoing in order to actually get there where it's not possible to get by hand or by a truck or a lift.
And a story like that, it's just stress again the importance of having a wireless system, right? Because you're working in 10 meters high. Imagine walking around with a USB data logger, putting it there, taking it down, putting it there again. Oh my God, that's just sad work.
Yeah.
So that's also why I assume that you guys are developing on your practicalities of it, the stakeholder management, but probably also on the software side, right? Because that's something that you often push to our product development department. Like we need this and this and that to be more efficient or create an even better system for our customers. How does that work?
Actually, as Jakob mentioned earlier, the data analysis part of doing a temperature mapping is not complex. It's not that hard, actually. It's about having some averages, some homogeneity or stability. That's like basically enough to have peaks. So the software needs to be validated, as we spoke about, but doesn't need to be that that complex, so to say. Another thing is that the test plans, working on the protocol and having test plans, that's pretty much still manual documents, that PDF documents that you need to print out and do the testing and documentation. We have been through the issues that can go wrong during the documentation part, that you need some good documentation practice to actually do the documentation. And having those having a software that actually implies that has that in the package, that so you only have to plot in information instead of in handwriting. That's automation, and automation is then you're less prone to mistakes. So that's a thing that we are working on and developing at the moment. The whole test plan, digital test plan or electronic test planning, because we find it still is very manual still out there, and as you saw, the list of things that can go wrong, much of it was revolving documentation and actual review of documentation. So yes, that's interesting questions, and we do have this in mind actually. So it's
and it kind of leads me to the last question. We are almost up, and it's been a fantastic session until now. Really like all the super useful insights that you got, and the questions from you guys out on the other side has been so valuable. I hope I've answered some of them, but I can see that there's been a lot. The last question that I want to hear you guys of is like, how do you really, the glass ball here, how do you look at the future in temperature mappings for your point of view? In Europe, we have the new test and validation system that we are almost about to launch. We have the mapping system, we have the monitoring system, we have the data loggers, we have the calibration. So you have the entire package. You're doing consultancy work for clients out there. What is the future here?
Yeah, I think one of the things that will change in the near future is basically also remote mappings. So kind of accepting that we as consultants don't need to go on site to perform these things, that those will be an accredited service. I think that's one thing, because we have a movement of digitized systems which have inherent quality controls, which have inherent fault detection. I think that'll be a very large part of it. The shift in digitization at least will make it so, and I think most of this was also, or a large part of this was really boosted by the coronavirus, where we weren't able to go on site, but then we could ship equipment for someone to do it as well. So you kind of have this division between having some very fault tolerant systems, which allows people with sort of the experience within how to write protocols and reports and look at data in one location, and you have the opportunity for organizations to put up mapping equipment, sort of the execution of the mapping, having them perform that themselves, which I think will save a lot of cost and time. It will be a lot more flexible. I think that's one of the major things that's going to happen in the near future. And then again, as I said before, digitization, auditors, both from our customers and from regulatory authorities, are seeing digitization as the way forward, as a way to reduce risk, and as a way to increase compliance, and not just as a secondary option to paper-based documentation, but sort of start to see the digitalized version as the primary standard and paper being sort of the secondary.
Both points do agree, especially the first point of doing remote mappings. That's a thing, and I'm actually looking forward to that shift. Because it's possible. It's possible. Making sure that you have guidelines, some that are easy to read, and having a package, like if you imagine having just a suitcase of the whole package in there with documentation, and you just ship that over whenever in the world, and the end user just follow some simple guides on placing, whether it's 100 or it's 10 data loggers. You just follow some guidelines, and the data gathering is just, everything is IoT and is up there in the cloud, and then we can provide both protocols, data analysis, much shorter because it's just a kit that's going out there in the facilities. So yeah, that's totally agree. That's the future and near future.
Near future.
Yeah, I believe. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Okay. Well, I'm excited about that, and thanks for looking into the future and the glass ball from your guys' point of view, and thank you very much for a super good presentation. Thanks to you on the other side of the screen. It's been wonderful to follow your questions again. And don't hesitate to drop a comment on our LinkedIn page or Jan's LinkedIn page. Thank you to our host Jan for once again a super good hosting of this event and all the nice attendees that you have in your network.
Thank you very much, Adam. It was a pleasure having you on our platform. Question to the audience. So we are considering having UPRI again with other topics. Let us know in the chat if you want them to come back with some more exciting webinars. So let us know if you want them back. Write it in the chat. And so far, great presentation. Really loved it. We will also have soon a post about it on LinkedIn. So make sure to follow me on LinkedIn. And then if you have other questions, you can post them on the chat. Sorry, you can post them directly on this thread, and probably Adam, Arsalan, or Jakob will answer it. So take them as well. So I'm seeing quite a lot of yeses coming in the chat that they want you guys back. So maybe you can also write a couple of topics. So we understand that the main idea here is thermal validation. So what are you interested in? What are you doing right now in your companies where you have difficulties in this area? Is it warehouses, coolers, freezers? Is it transports? Let us know what bothers you most, and we will make sure to get the UPRI guys with us, either themselves or with other partners together with UPRI and we will discuss those specific topics. So please write in the chat what bothers you the most, what would you like to hear around this topic of thermal mapping, thermal validation, and we will do our best in the next couple of months to get another interesting webinar on those topics that you suggest. So write it in the chat. Perfect. Also, on top, you see UPRI's LinkedIn page. Make sure to follow them. They have also quite interesting articles that they tend to share. So right now, on top, UPRI's LinkedIn page. Make sure also to follow it as well. You will get your certificate within a couple of days. Hopefully tomorrow, maybe after tomorrow, you will get it quite quickly. If you don't get it within 7 days or so, first check your spam folder because it might land there. Then reach out to info@qualistry.com. Then the recording, you will get it directly from UPRI, hopefully also soon, also with the slides, probably with super interesting additional tools that can help you and different link sources and so on. So thank you very much, UPRI, for being here today. Thank you very much to the audience, the amazing audience from all over the world. It's so great to have you here again, and we will see you at our next webinar. Have a great day or evening ahead of you.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.